It was a quiet evening in a small, forgotten town. The sun had set, and the dark sky stretched out, filled with nothing but distant stars. Jack, a young orphan with messy brown hair and tired eyes, wandered the streets, his stomach growling from the lack of food. The town was empty, and he felt completely alone, just like always. His worn clothes clung to his thin frame, but it didn't bother him. He was used to the cold. Suddenly, a bright light appeared in the sky. At first, Jack thought it was just a shooting star. But then, the light grew bigger and brighter, faster and faster. His heart raced as he watched the object spiral down toward the ground, trailing smoke and fire. There was no time to think. Jack ran toward the light, his curiosity taking over his fear. The light crashed into the old farm outside of town with a deafening explosion that shook the ground beneath his feet. Jack stumbled, falling to his knees as dust and debris filled the air. The ground trembled from the impact. His heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't run. He couldn't. Something inside him told him to go toward it. He pushed himself to his feet and started running again, his shoes kicking up dirt as he moved toward the crash site. When Jack reached the site, the wreckage of the fiery object lay scattered across the field. The flames were still burning, but they were starting to die down. Jack approached carefully, his breath shallow. He could see a strange metal structure twisted and broken in the middle of the field. There was someone lying next to the wreckage. Jack's eyes widened as he saw the figure. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The creature was tall and had blue skin, with long limbs and a thin frame. Its clothes were ripped, and there was blood on its chest, but it was alive. The creature was breathing, its chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. Jack took a hesitant step closer, his heart pounding in his throat. He knelt beside the alien, his hands trembling. The alien's eyes were closed, and its face was twisted in pain. Jack swallowed hard. He had never seen anything like this. It wasn't human. It wasn't even from Earth. Jack knew that he should be scared, that he should run away. But he didn't. He couldn't leave the alien alone in the wreckage. It needed help. Without thinking, Jack carefully reached out and touched the creature's arm. It was cold, but there was a faint pulse underneath the blue skin. "Hey," Jack whispered softly, "are you okay?" There was no response. The alien's breathing was slow, and Jack could tell it was struggling to stay conscious. He glanced around, but there was no one else in sight. He was on his own. Jack knew he had to do something. He couldn't just leave it here to die. Taking a deep breath, he carefully lifted the alien's body, surprising himself with how light it was. He staggered for a moment, almost dropping it, but steadied himself. He couldn't stop now. With every step he took, Jack felt his fear start to fade. He wasn't thinking about how dangerous this could be, or how impossible it seemed. All he could think about was getting the alien to safety. It wasn't an alien anymore. It was someone in need of help, just like him. He managed to drag the creature back to his small, run-down cabin at the edge of town. Sweat dripped down his forehead, his muscles burning with the effort. But Jack didn't stop. He laid the alien down gently on his worn-out couch, panting from the exertion. He looked down at the strange creature, unsure of what to do next. As he wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, Jack noticed something strange on the alien's body. A small device was embedded in its wrist, glowing softly. Jack reached out cautiously, curiosity bubbling inside him. He had no idea what it was or how it worked, but it seemed important. As he touched the device, it flickered, making a faint buzzing sound. Jack jumped back in surprise, his heart racing. He didn't know it yet, but this was the first of many strange discoveries to come. Jack had just saved someone or something that was far more important than he could have ever imagined. Jack sat on the edge of his worn-out couch, staring at the strange blue alien lying unconscious before him. His hands trembled as he wiped the sweat off his brow. He had no idea what he was dealing with, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary being. The glowing device on the alien's wrist still pulsed faintly, casting an eerie light in the room. Jack had seen enough weird things in his life, but this was something else. The alien was breathing slowly, and Jack could tell it was still alive, but barely. He didn't know what to do. He wasn't a doctor, and he sure wasn't prepared for an alien emergency. But in a way, Jack was used to looking after things. He had taken care of himself for years after his parents died, never relying on anyone else. Maybe that's why, without thinking, he grabbed the first aid kit from under the sink and started tending to the alien's wounds. His hands worked quickly, bandaging the blue skin with whatever he had on hand, trying to make sure the creature wouldn't die on his watch. As he worked, Jack kept glancing at the glowing device. It seemed important, like it held some kind of power, but he had no idea what it could do. Should he press it? Would it hurt the alien more? Or could it be a lifeline, a way to help? His curiosity got the best of him, and he slowly reached out, gently tapping the glowing surface. The device hummed, and to Jack's surprise, it projected a soft blue light that filled the room. It was like a hologram, floating in midair. Jack's heart skipped a beat as he stared at the strange symbols that appeared before him. The shapes seemed to shift, like they were alive, changing with every movement. It wasn't anything he could understand, but the symbols looked important. He touched the hologram again, hoping it would do something more. Nothing happened. Feeling a mix of frustration and wonder, Jack backed away from the projection and sat back down. He looked at the alien again. There was something about its face that seemed almost human, despite its otherworldly features. The more Jack stared, the more he felt like he wasn't just caring for a creature from another planet. He was protecting something much bigger, something with a purpose he couldn't even begin to understand. Hours passed. Jack stayed awake, keeping an eye on the alien. He wasn't sure why he felt so drawn to it, but he couldn't let it go. The alien's breathing grew steadier, and Jack began to wonder what would happen when it woke up. Would it be angry? Would it attack him? Or would it simply leave, disappearing into the night like nothing had ever happened? There was no way to know, but Jack wasn't sure he was ready to let it go either. The more he thought about it, the more he realized this was his chance for something bigger, something beyond the lonely, forgotten life he'd always known. As the hours slipped by, the room grew quiet. Jack's eyelids began to droop, and just as he was about to drift into sleep, a faint sound broke the silence. The alien's hand twitched, then its eyes slowly opened. They were unlike anything Jack had ever seen, glowing, bright, full of intelligence and depth. The creature's gaze met Jack's, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. "Who are you?" The alien's voice was soft, barely a whisper, but there was something ancient in it. Jack's breath caught in his throat. This was it. The moment he'd been waiting for. The moment he would finally understand what had fallen into his life. The alien's eyes stared into Jack's, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Jack's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what was happening. This was no dream. This was real. The being in front of him was alive and conscious. The soft glow in its eyes slowly dimmed, but the silent connection between them remained. Thick with questions. Jack swallowed hard. "You're awake?" he asked, his voice trembling. He didn't know what to say or how to react. The alien's features were still strange to him, its blue skin, the long, thin arms, the sharp, angular face. But there was a softness in its eyes now, a kind of vulnerability that Jack didn't expect. The alien blinked, its lips parting as if it were trying to find the right words. It raised a hand weakly and touched the side of its head. "Where am I?" The voice was deeper now, but still quiet, struggling to find clarity. It was not like anything Jack had heard before. The words weren't perfect, but Jack understood them, and that was enough. He nodded slowly, his heartbeat loud in his ears. "You're in my house," Jack said, his throat dry. "I found you after the crash." The alien's eyes flickered for a moment as if remembering the explosion, the fiery descent from the sky. Jack could see it, the flash of panic that crossed the creature's face before it softened again. It seemed confused, lost. Jack's heart softened at the sight. "Who are you?" Jack asked again, his curiosity growing. It wasn't just the alien's identity that fascinated him, it was the why. Why was this being here? Why had it crashed? And more importantly, why had it chosen to help him? The alien tilted its head slightly, as if pondering the question. "I am Zelther." The name echoed in Jack's mind, carrying a weight that was impossible to ignore. "Zelther of Zalmaris." Jack repeated the name under his breath, trying to commit it to memory. "Zelther, what? What are you doing here?" Why did you crash? Zelther's gaze turned distant, and he looked away for a moment, as if lost in his own thoughts. My ship malfunctioned. There was a attack. I tried to escape. His voice trailed off as he struggled to sit up, the pain clearly making it difficult. Jack rushed to help, gently propping him up with a pillow. You were being chased? Jack asked, feeling a chill spread down his spine. That was the only explanation that made sense. By who? Zelther closed his eyes briefly, his expression unreadable. Enemies. Powerful enemies, I cannot explain more, not yet. His voice faltered, like he didn't trust himself to continue. There was so much pain in his tone. But Jack couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning of a much larger story. Jack leaned back, staring at Zelther, who was still struggling to stay alert. There was so much he didn't know, and so many more questions. Why had the alien chosen him to help? What was he really running from? And what was this powerful force that could make a being like Zelther crash onto Earth? The silence hung between them, thick and heavy, until finally Zelther spoke again. His voice low and full of something Jack couldn't place. Your life will change now, human. Mine already has. Jack swallowed, the words sinking into him like a weight. Something told him this wasn't just about saving an alien anymore. This was about something far bigger, something that could change everything. His curiosity deepened, and Jack realized that whatever Zelther had to say, wherever this journey led, he couldn't turn back now. I'm ready, Jack said softly, more to himself than to the alien. But in that moment, he knew one thing for certain: his life would never be the same again. The days passed quickly as Jack helped Zelther recover. The alien's wounds healed, but there was something in his eyes that Jack couldn't ignore, a constant wariness, like he was waiting for something to happen, something dangerous. Jack tried to push the fear out of his mind. The strange circumstances surrounding Zelther's crash were too much for him to fully comprehend. But he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just a chance encounter. One evening, as Jack was helping Zelther set up a small makeshift work area to repair his ship, a loud noise shattered the quiet night. It was distant at first, a low rumble that vibrated through the walls of the cabin. Jack froze, his heart racing. Zelther's eyes flickered toward the window, his expression suddenly tense. Without saying a word, he grabbed Jack by the arm, pulling him toward the back door. Jack had no time to ask questions. His instincts kicked in, and he followed Zelther, running as fast as his legs could carry him. They didn't stop until they were deep in the woods, where the trees seemed to swallow them whole. The sound of the rumbling grew louder, and Jack could feel his heart pounding in his chest. What's going on? Who's coming? He asked, his breath coming in short gasps. Zelther didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to face Jack, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and resolve. They've found me, he whispered. They are here. Jack's blood ran cold. Who were they? And why was Zelther so afraid of them? As if on cue, the sound of engines roared through the forest. The ground vibrated beneath their feet as a series of black vehicles sped down the dirt road, their headlights cutting through the trees like searching spotlights. Zelther's face tightened, his muscles tensing in a way Jack had never seen before. He had seen fear in Zelther's eyes, but now there was something different, something far more intense. We have to move, Zelther said urgently, pulling Jack deeper into the forest, away from the approaching vehicles. I'll explain later, but right now we need to survive. Jack didn't ask any more questions. He ran, his mind racing with thoughts of what was happening. The mercenaries were closing in, and Zelther's enemies were here, on Earth, ready to take him back. But what did that mean for Jack? Had he just unwittingly gotten tangled up in something far beyond his understanding? As they pushed through the thick brush, Jack could hear the vehicles getting closer, their engines roaring like predators stalking their prey. The air was thick with tension. Zelther was moving faster now, his alien agility kicking in as he leaped over fallen trees and pushed through the undergrowth. With ease, Jack, on the other hand, was struggling to keep up. He was strong, but nothing compared to Zelther's speed and endurance. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached a small clearing. Zelther stopped and turned to Jack, his eyes scanning the area quickly. We need to hide, he said, his voice low. They can't find us. But it was already too late. The headlights of the mercenary vehicles cut through the trees, and the unmistakable sound of boots hitting the ground echoed in the distance. Jack felt a cold chill run down his spine. These weren't just ordinary people chasing Zelther, they were professionals, well-trained, and relentless. Zelther stepped closer to Jack, his face now calm but full of determination. "Stay close," he instructed. "If they find us, they will take both of us." Jack felt a surge of adrenaline. This was real. He wasn't just helping some alien stranger anymore. This was a battle for survival, and he was in the thick of it. He couldn't turn back now. As the mercenaries drew nearer, Jack and Zelther hid behind a large boulder, the sounds of their pursuers growing louder by the second. The stakes had just gotten much higher. Jack had no idea what Zelther was running from, but he knew one thing for sure: this wasn't just a simple rescue mission anymore. It was a fight for their lives. The sound of the mercenaries' boots grew louder, each step echoing through the quiet woods. Jack could feel his heartbeat thudding in his chest as he crouched low behind the large boulder, trying to make himself as small as possible. Zelther's presence beside him was a silent force. His alien stillness radiated like a calm before a storm. Jack's mind raced, trying to process the situation. These people weren't just looking for Zelther. They were hunting him, and now Jack had been dragged into something far bigger than himself. The mercenaries' voices drifted through the trees, muffled but growing closer. Jack could see their flashlight beams cutting through the night, sweeping in every direction. They weren't just looking for anyone. They were searching for a specific target. Zelther's eyes flickered toward the distant voices, his body tensing like a coiled spring. His gaze shifted back to Jack, and there was an unspoken understanding between them. They had to get out of there, or they would both be caught. Zelther stood up suddenly, his movements swift and calculated. Jack's breath hitched in his throat as the alien pulled out a small, sleek device from the folds of his clothes. With a press of a button, a faint blue light emanated from it, illuminating the area around them. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Zelther motioned for Jack to follow him, and without hesitation, Jack moved silently behind him, his eyes scanning the surrounding woods for any sign of the mercenaries. They moved swiftly, but the sounds of pursuit were relentless. The mercenaries weren't far behind. Jack felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him with each step. His legs were aching, and his breath was shallow, but he didn't dare stop. Not now. Zelther's alien agility was almost unnatural, making Jack feel like he was struggling to keep up. Every so often, Zelther would glance back at him, his face a mask of focus. But Jack couldn't help but notice the subtle signs of worry in his eyes. They were being hunted, and Zelther knew it. As they crept deeper into the forest, Zelther led them toward a small, abandoned cabin, barely visible through the thick underbrush. It looked deserted, its wooden frame rotting and falling apart. Zelther turned to Jack with a silent signal, urging him to stay low. Jack followed his lead, sliding into the cabin's dark shadows. They barely had time to breathe before the mercenaries' voices grew louder once again. "I have to hide it," Zelther whispered, his breath steady despite the danger. "You need to stay quiet." Jack nodded, his pulse racing. He didn't know what Zelther was hiding, but it was clear that whatever it was far too valuable to let fall into the wrong hands. The thought of what might happen if they were caught made Jack's stomach twist with dread. He wasn't just an orphan anymore, he was part of something far larger. And the mercenaries weren't going to stop until they had what they were after. The forest seemed to close in around them, the air thick with tension as Jack and Zelther crouched inside the crumbling cabin. The dim light from the alien's device barely illuminated the room, casting long, eerie shadows across the rotting walls. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, his breath shallow as the sounds of the mercenaries grew louder. Their voices now just outside the cabin. Zelther's gaze remained fixed on the door, his expression a mixture of resolve and fear. He was clearly preparing for something, but Jack didn't know what. The alien's previous calmness had evaporated, replaced by a silent urgency that was almost palpable. Jack felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Whatever Zelther was hiding, whatever had caused this chase, was no longer just a distant problem. It was here, and it was inescapable. "They'll find us," Jack whispered, his voice trembling despite himself. The thought of facing those mercenaries, professional, cold-blooded killers, made him feel smaller than ever. He was no hero, just a lonely kid caught up in something far beyond his control. Zelder didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a deep breath, his fingers grazing the edges of the device in his hand, as if collecting his thoughts. "They're relentless," he finally said, his voice low and tense. "They will stop at nothing to capture me, and you." He paused, his eyes locking onto Jack's. "You must stay hidden. Jack, this is your only chance to survive." Jack's stomach churned at the thought of hiding while Zelder faced danger alone. He wasn't going to leave him behind. They were in this together, whether Zelder liked it or not. "I'm not leaving," Jack muttered firmly, his resolve solidifying. Zelder hesitated, then nodded slowly. "If you stay, it's going to get much worse. But we don't have a choice now." The sound of boots crunching on the dry leaves outside grew louder. They were getting closer, circling the cabin, and Jack could hear the unmistakable sound of rifles being cocked. There was no time left. Zelder's hand shot out and grabbed Jack's arm, pulling him towards the far corner of the cabin. The alien whispered something Jack couldn't understand, but the meaning was clear. It was a command, one Jack had no choice but to follow. "Stay here," Zelder said, his voice hardening. "Don't move. No matter what you hear." Jack's mind raced. He wanted to protest, wanted to argue, but the look in Zelder's eyes silenced him. There was nothing he could do now, nothing that would keep them safe unless they followed through with this plan. Zelder had always been in control, but now Jack was part of the equation whether he was ready or not. Zelder turned and moved toward the cabin's back door, his steps silent. The alien's presence was both commanding and calm, like a predator preparing to face its enemy. Jack clenched his fists, trying to control the rising panic that threatened to take over. He had no idea what was about to happen, but one thing was clear: this moment was about to change everything. The mercenaries were closing in, and there was nowhere to run. The back door of the cabin creaked as it opened, and Zelder slipped into the night, his movements fluid and purposeful. Jack could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on him as he crouched in the darkness, barely daring to breathe. The sound of the mercenaries' footsteps was almost deafening now, their boots crunching on the dried leaves, growing closer with every passing second. Jack's heart raced, his mind spinning with fear and confusion. He had no idea what Zelder was planning, but he knew it was the only chance they had. Zelder had disappeared into the shadows, but Jack could hear the faint rustle of movement in the distance. His eyes stayed fixed on the door, willing himself to stay still. He had to trust that Zelder knew what he was doing, but as the seconds dragged on, that trust was all he had left. From outside, there was a sudden, sharp shout. One of the mercenaries had spotted something. The cabin door was flung open, and Jack's breath caught in his throat. The mercenaries poured inside, their rifles raised, eyes scanning the dark corners of the room. Jack pressed himself against the floor, hoping they wouldn't see him. "Search the place," one of them ordered. He couldn't have gone far. Jack's heart thudded painfully in his chest, but he didn't move a muscle. He could hear the mercenaries moving around, kicking over crates and checking the corners of the cabin. His pulse raced. He couldn't let them find him, not now. He had to trust Zelder. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from outside, followed by the sound of shouting and the unmistakable whir of advanced technology. Jack's eyes widened as he realized Zelder was fighting back. The mercenaries began to yell, scrambling to get organized, but it was too late. Zelder had already made his move. Jack stood slowly, his legs shaking, and peeked through a crack in the cabin wall. What he saw made his blood run cold. Zelder, standing tall and defiant, was facing off against the mercenaries, but now he was armed with a weapon that Jack hadn't seen before, sleek, glowing, and emitting a low hum of power. The alien's posture was calm, controlled, as if this was exactly what he had planned all along. "I told you," Zelder said, his voice cold. "You'll never take me alive." The mercenaries, taken aback by his sudden resistance, hesitated for a brief moment, but their leader quickly barked orders. "Don't just stand there. Take him down." The chaos that followed felt like an eternity to Jack. He watched as Zelder expertly dodged and countered the mercenaries' attacks, his movements fluid and precise. The aliens' technology was a force to be reckoned with, and the mercenaries seemed completely outmatched. Jack could barely believe what he was seeing. This was the alien he had helped, the one who had seemed so vulnerable when he first found him. But now, he was something entirely different. Jack's heart raced as he saw an opening. He knew it was now or never. Without thinking, he grabbed a rusted piece of metal from the ground and rushed toward the fray. The mercenaries were too distracted by Zelther's skill to notice him, and in a moment of adrenaline-fueled bravery, Jack swung the metal piece at the nearest mercenary, knocking him off balance. The mercenary stumbled back in surprise, and for a split second, the fight paused. Zelther's eyes flicked to Jack for just a moment, a brief look of surprise on his face. But there was something else there too: gratitude. The alien quickly took advantage of the distraction, incapacitating another mercenary with a swift movement. Within moments, the mercenaries realized they were outmatched. One by one, they began retreating, shouting orders into their earpieces. Jack's hands were shaking, and his breath was ragged, but he could barely register the shock of what had just happened. He had actually fought back, and together, they had taken down the mercenaries. The silence that followed was almost deafening. Jack stood in the clearing, his mind reeling from the chaos of the last few minutes. Zelther approached him slowly, his weapon still in hand but lowered. His face, though still marked by the intensity of battle, softened as he looked at Jack. "Thank you," Zelther said quietly, his voice steady but filled with something Jack hadn't heard before: appreciation. "I didn't expect you to fight, but you did." Jack could barely speak. His throat was dry, his mind still catching up to the whirlwind of events. "I didn't have much choice. You were in trouble." Zelther studied him for a moment, then nodded. "And you came through. You're stronger than you know." As they stood in the aftermath, the gravity of what had just happened began to sink in. Zelther's enemies had been defeated for now, but Jack knew this was far from over. There were more battles to fight, more dangers ahead. But for the first time in a long time, Jack didn't feel so alone. He had someone by his side, someone who had a story far bigger than anything he could have imagined. And together, they had just made it out alive. The future, though uncertain, felt a little less terrifying now.